Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was in the CW Stargirl show. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world dissolved into a symphony of screaming metal and fractured concrete. Izuku Midoriya, known to the world as the hero in training Deku, was a whirlwind of green lightning and focused intent. Full cowling at 20% sent a familiar, thrumming hum through his bones, a power that was both a gift and a constant, aching responsibility. Around him, a city block in Nizurifu, Japan, had been turned into a surrealist nightmare. Buildings sagged like tired old men, their steel skeletons exposed. Cars were twisted into metallic sculptures of agony. The cause of it all was a villain who called himself Warpgate. He wasn't a teleporter, not in the clean, efficient way of someone like Kurogyri. His quirk was chaos incarnate. He didn't open doors, he tore holes in reality. Shimmering, unstable fissures hung in the air like heat haze, their edges bleeding prismatic light. Anything that touched them was violently shunted to a random, nearby location, or, as the heroes were terrifyingly beginning to suspect, somewhere else entirely. Deku! To your left! Tsuyu Ajiri's voice, calm and steady even in the chaos, crackled through his earpiece. He didn't hesitate. Pivoting on his heel, he launched a St. Louis smash with his leg, the compressed air screaming past the shimmering portal and slamming into a chunk of debris hurtling toward a group of huddled civilians. The concrete exploded into dust. "Thanks, Froppy!" he yelled, his eyes scanning, analyzing, categorizing threats. His mind was a frantic storm of calculations. Villains' effective range is approximately 50 meters. Portals are unstable, lasting between 3 and 10 seconds. Their destination is unpredictable. Priority 1, civilian evacuation. Priority 2, contain the villain. I'm trying to get a line on him, but he keeps shifting. Achiko Uravity, called out. She was tapping rubble with her fingertips, floating the heavier pieces to clear a path for the paramedics. "He's like a flea on a hot plate," Warpgate cackled, a high, grating sound that scraped against the nerves. He was a small, twitchy man in a cheap suit, his eyes wide with manic glee. "Can't catch what you can't predict, heroes. Chaos is the only true order." He flicked his wrist, and another tear in space ripped open right in front of an apartment building's already shattered entrance. It was then that Deku saw them. A mother shielding her young son, both frozen in terror. They were too close, directly in the path of the shimmering distortion. The portal was expanding, its gravitational pull plucking at the loose asphalt around it. The boy, no older than 5, stumbled and fell, his small gasp lost in the cacophony. Time seemed to slow, condensing into a single, crystalline moment of choice. Every fiber of Deku's being, every lesson from All Might, every ounce of One for All screamed a single, undeniable command: save him. He pushed his power, feeling the strain jump from 20 to 25%. The green lightning around him flared, crackling with audible energy. He was a blur, a green comet streaking across the ruined street. He could feel the unnatural pull of the portal, a cold, slick tug on reality itself. It felt wrong, like the universe was being peeled back. He reached the family in a heartbeat. "It's okay. I've got you." He scooped the boy into one arm and pushed the mother with the other, a firm, desperate shove that sent her stumbling backward, out of the portal's immediate reach. "Get back," he commanded, his voice tight with strain. He turned, intending to leap away, but his foot snagged on a piece of rebar jutting from the broken pavement. For a fraction of a second, his momentum was arrested. It was all the portal needed. The pull was no longer a gentle tug. It was a physical, irresistible force. It latched onto him, the energy of One for All acting like a beacon in the storm. He felt a horrific sensation, like being pulled through a keyhole. The world outside the portal, Achiko's horrified face, Tsuyu's outstretched tongue, the red and blue flash of emergency lights, all squeezed into a single point of light. Then came the sensory overload. Colors he had no name for flooded his vision. Sounds became physical pressure, and the feeling of his own body seemed to stretch and compress like taffy. He felt the ghosts of One for All within him cry out, a silent, unified scream of confusion and alarm. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. Silence. Darkness. The sensation of falling. He slammed into something solid with a sickening crunch that echoed through his entire body. The impact was brutal, knocking the air from his lungs in a painful gasp. He thought he heard a sound like a giant tree splintering and toppling over, but his head was ringing too loudly to be sure. He tumbled through rough foliage, branches and thorns tearing at his already damaged costume, until he finally rolled to a stop on a bed of damp, fragrant earth. Pain was the first thing to register. A sharp, radiating agony from his left shoulder and a dull, throbbing ache that seemed to encompass his entire being. He lay there, face down in the dirt, for what could have been seconds or minutes. The only sound was his own ragged breathing and the gentle rustle of leaves in a quiet breeze. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself onto his elbows. His head swam. He blinked, trying to clear the spots from his vision. He wasn't in Mizudafu. There was no smoke, no fire, no screaming sirens. He was in a forest. Tall, unfamiliar trees formed a dense canopy overhead, dappling the forest floor with soft, late-afternoon sunlight. The air smelled clean, rich with the scent of pine needles and damp soil. A gentle quiet permeated the area, broken only by the chirping of insects and the distant call of a bird. It was peaceful, terrifyingly peaceful. Where? He whispered, his voice a raw croak. He tried to stand, but a sharp pain lanced through his shoulder, and he collapsed back with a groan. Dislocated. He gritted his teeth, grabbing the joint and shoving it back into place with a choked-off scream of pain. Tears pricked his eyes. He took a shaky breath and tried to assess his situation. His costume was a wreck. The cowl was torn, one of the ears hanging by a thread. There were multiple rips in the fabric, and his gloves were shredded. His body felt like one giant bruise. He reached for the spark within him, the ever-present, reassuring hum of one for all. He found it, but it was different. The familiar, warm flow of power felt muted, replaced by a strange, buzzing static, like a radio tuned just off its frequency. It was there, but it felt alien, unstable. The connection to the vestiges was faint, almost non-existent, like they were shouting to him from across a vast, empty ocean. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of his forced composure. Okay, Midoriya. Think. Analyze the situation. His muttering habit kicked in, a familiar comfort in an utterly alien place. I was pulled through one of Warp Date's portals. The destination was unknown. This location doesn't look like Japan. The foliage is different. The air, it feels different. Am I still on Earth? Another country? Another dimension? The last thought sent a jolt of pure ice through his veins. He squeezed his eyes shut. No. He couldn't afford to panic. He had to find help. He had to find a way back. He had to let them know he was okay. All Might, his mom. Uraraka, everyone would be worried sick. He forced himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. Leaning against a thick oak tree, he took in his surroundings. He was in a small clearing, one side of which was dominated by a massive, freshly fallen tree, the one he'd apparently broken his fall with. Its trunk was splintered and shattered, a testament to the force of his landing. He had to move. Find a road. Find a town. Find someone. Anyone. Miles away, in that very same forest, Courtney Whitmore grunted in frustration. Come on, stupid thing. Work with me. She yelled at the 6-foot golden staff in her hands. The cosmic staff, as her stepdad Pat called it, remained stubbornly inert, its metallic surface gleaming in the sunlight. She'd been trying for the better part of an hour to get it to do something, anything, on command. She'd seen the security footage of its previous wielder, Starman. He made it fly, shoot beams of energy, create shields. All she could seem to do was make it glow, and occasionally trip over it. Okay, let's try again, she muttered to herself, gripping it tightly. Fly. Nothing. Up. It stayed put. Okay, fine. Shazam? The staff seemed to mock her with its silence. She sighed, letting it fall to the soft grass. It was one thing to find out your weird, slightly embarrassing stepdad used to be a superhero's sidekick. It was another thing entirely to find out that your real dad might have been that superhero, and that his magical space rod had apparently chosen you as its successor. It was a lot for a 15-year-old to process, especially in a town as mind-numbingly boring as Blue Valley, Nebraska. She flopped onto her back, staring up at the sky through the leaves. This is hopeless. How am I supposed to avenge you if I can't even get your cosmic stick to float? As the words left her mouth, the staff beside her suddenly hummed to life. It lifted a few inches off the ground, its golden light pulsing with an eager, insistent rhythm. Courtney sat up, her eyes wide. Whoa! Okay, that's new. What is it? The staff didn't respond to her question. Instead, it turned in the air, its top end pointing deeper into the woods, to the east. It tugged, like a dog on a leash wanting to chase a squirrel. What's over there? She asked, intrigued. A bad guy. Did you sense a bad guy? The staff pulsed brighter, tugging more urgently. It floated forward a few feet, then stopped, as if waiting for her to follow. A thrill, equal parts fear and excitement, shot through her. This was it, her first real mission. Okay, I'm coming, she said, scrambling to her feet and grabbing the staff. It pulled her along, its energy thrumming in her hand. She broke into a jog, her heart pounding in her chest as she navigated through the trees and undergrowth. This is real. This is happening. She ran for several minutes, the staff leading her with unwavering certainty. The light it was emitting grew brighter, the hum louder. It was sensing something powerful. Something immense. She burst into a small clearing and froze, her breath catching in her throat. The first thing she saw was the massive, fallen tree. It looked like it had been struck by lightning, but the sky was clear. The second thing she saw was him. A boy, maybe a year or two older than her, was leaning against another tree. He was covered in dirt and scratches, his clothes, a bizarre, tattered green and black jumpsuit with what looked like rabbit ears on a broken hood, were unlike anything she'd ever seen. His hair was a chaotic mop of dark green, and his face, pale and strained, was dotted with freckles. He was clutching his arm, his body trembling with either pain or exhaustion. He hadn't noticed her yet. He was muttering to himself, his eyes darting around the woods with a frantic, desperate energy. The cosmic staff in her hand went wild. It shone with the brilliance of a miniature sun, the hum escalating to a high-pitched thrum. It was reacting to him. The sudden flare of light and sound made the boy flinch. His head snapped in her direction. His eyes, wide and shockingly green, locked onto hers. For a moment, he looked like a cornered animal. Then his gaze dropped to the glowing staff in her hand. His expression shifted from fear to utter, bewildered confusion. A support item? He whispered, his voice hoarse. Courtney, for her part, just stared. This was not the supervillain she had imagined. This was just a kid. A very weirdly dressed, very injured kid. Who are you? She finally managed to ask, her voice barely a squeak. Izuka Midoriya stared at the girl. She was blonde, dressed in normal civilian clothes, and holding a glowing, golden staff that was radiating an energy he never felt before. It wasn't a quirk. It felt different. Older. More fundamental. His mind, reeling from pain and disorientation, latched onto the only logical explanation it could find. Are you a pro-hero? He asked, his voice cracking. I need help. There was a villain, a portal. I don't know where I am. The girl just blinked at him. Pro-hero? What are you talking about? Are you okay? You're bleeding. The staff's light softened, its humming subsiding to a gentle thrum. It seemed to be assessing him, its initial alarm giving way to curiosity. Deku's legs finally gave out. The adrenaline that had been keeping him upright vanished, and he slid down the trunk of the tree, collapsing into a heap on the ground. The world was starting to spin, black spots dancing in his vision. The last thing he saw was the blonde girl's worried face as she rushed toward him, her cosmic staff hovering protectively beside her. Then, everything went dark. The first sensation was the smell. Oil, old metal, and a faint, lingering scent of antiseptic. The second was the feeling of a soft, lumpy couch beneath him. Izuka's eyes fluttered open. He was in some kind of basement, or workshop. Tools lined the walls on pegboards, car parts were stacked neatly on shelves, and a massive, partially disassembled vintage car sat in the center of the room. He was on an old plaid sofa, a thick, wool blanket draped over him. His left shoulder was tightly bandaged, and the various cuts and scrapes on his arms and face had been cleaned and covered. His tattered hero costume had been removed and was folded on a nearby stool, looking even more pathetic and out of place in the dim light. He was dressed in a plain gray t-shirt and sweatpants that were far too big for him. "He's waking up." The voice was female, young. The girl from the woods. He sat up with a groan, his head pounding. She was sitting in a chair opposite him, watching him with wide, curious eyes. Standing behind her was a large, burly man with a kind but deeply worried face. He was wiping grease from his hands with a rag, his expression a mixture of suspicion and concern. "Easy there, son," the man said, his voice a low rumble. "You took a nasty fall." Izuku's hero training kicked in. Assessed the situation. Potential threats. Exit strategy. But his body refused to cooperate, and his head felt like it was full of cotton. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice raspy. "You're in my basement," the girl said, leaning forward. "In Blue Valley, Nebraska. My stepdad, Pat, and I found you in the woods. You were pretty banged up." "What happened?" "Nebraska." The name sounded vaguely familiar, a place from his English language lessons. It was in America. He was in America. The reality of it hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just in another city, he was on the other side of the planet. Or was he? "You're Pat?" Izuku asked, looking at the man. He nodded slowly. "I'm Courtney," the girl added. "Midoriya." "Izuku Midoriya," he replied automatically. He had to tell them. He had to explain. Maybe they could help. "Listen, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I'm not from here. I was fighting a villain in Japan, and his quirk, it's a power, a special ability, it sent me here." Pat and Courtney exchanged a look. Pat's was a deep, troubled frown. Courtney's was one of unadulterated fascination. "A quirk?" Courtney repeated, her eyes lighting up. "Like a superpower?" "Exactly," Izuku said, relieved that she understood the concept. "About 80% of the world's population has one. I'm a student at Yue High School, a school for training pro-heroes." Pat stepped forward, crossing his thick arms. His friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by a wall of cautious skepticism. "Kid, that's a nice story. You watch a lot of anime or something? Now, tell me the truth. Where did you come from? Who are you working for?" "It is the truth," Izuku insisted, his voice rising with desperation. "My quirk is called One for All. It lets me stockpile an immense amount of raw power. Back home, I'm a hero in training. My hero name is Deku." Pat's eyes narrowed. "One for All? What is that, some kind of code?" "Listen, son. I've been around the block. I've seen things. Things you wouldn't believe, but dimension-hopping teenagers with quirks is a new one. All I know is you fell out of the sky, broke a 50-foot oak tree in half, and you're dressed in some kind of combat suit. That doesn't happen to normal people. But that's just it, I'm not normal," Izuku said, gesturing with his good arm. "In my world, this is normal. We have heroes, villains, government-sanctioned hero agencies. All Might is the #1 hero, the symbol of peace." He looked at their blank faces. You've never heard of All Might?" The utter lack of recognition in their eyes was more terrifying than any villain's threat. In his world, not knowing All Might was like not knowing the sun. "Pat, maybe he's telling the truth," Courtney said softly, her gaze fixed on Izuku. She believed him. Or at least, she wanted to. The staff reacted to him. It sensed his energy. It's never done that before. Pat ran a hand over his weary face. He looked from Izuku's earnest, pleading expression to his stepdaughter's hopeful one. "Courtney, can I talk to you for a second?" "Over here." He led her to the other side of the garage, leaving Izuku on the couch, his heart sinking with every passing moment. He could just make out their hushed, urgent whispers. "No idea what he is." "He could be dangerous," Pat hissed. "He's a kid. And he's hurt. He's scared, Pat, can't you see that? What I see is a boy who radiates enough energy to make the cosmic staff go haywire. That staff is powered by cosmic energy. It fought alongside the Justice Society of America for decades. It never reacted that way to anyone but Starman. This boy, his power is off the charts. And it's unstable. I saw the way his arm was bruised when we found him. It looked like he hurt himself using his own strength. So we help him. Isn't that what heroes do? Heroes are careful, Court. They don't just bring home strange boys who fall out of the sky. Izuku slumped back against the cushions, the weight of his situation crashing down on him. He was alone. Powerless to get home. Stranded in a world that didn't have heroes, didn't have quirks, and didn't have all might. He was just a freak who fell out of the sky. Pat and Courtney returned, their silent argument unresolved. Pat knelt in front of Izuku, his expression serious. Look, kid. Midoriya. I don't know what to believe. But you're hurt, and you're a minor. I'm not going to throw you out on the street. You can stay here for now. But you lay low. No powers. No weird costumes. You don't talk to anyone about where you came from. We need to figure out what's going on. Deal? Izuku could only nod, a wave of relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. Deal. Thank you. Thank you so much. Later that evening, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Pat had forbidden any more talk of quirks or other worlds at the dinner table for the sake of his wife, Barbara, and son, Mike, who were both baffled by the sudden appearance of a quiet, bruised Japanese boy in their home. Pat had spun a flimsy story about Izuku being the son of an old army buddy, who needed a place to stay for a while. Izuku, for his part, barely touched his food. Every bite felt like ash in his mouth. He was trying to project an air of calm, but inside, his mind was racing. He needed a plan. That plan was violently interrupted by the sound of sirens wailing in the distance. Courtney's head shot up, a spark in her eye. Pat gave her a sharp, warning look. Don't even think about it. It's probably just a fender bender, Barbara said calmly, taking a sip of her water, but the sirens were getting closer. They were accompanied by the distinct sound of shouting, and what sounded like shattering glass. It was happening nearby. Downtown. Courtney looked at Pat, then at Izuku. A silent communication passed between them. Trouble. I'll have to go take out the trash, Courtney said, abruptly standing up and grabbing her plate. It was the worst excuse Izuku had ever heard. She bolted from the room before anyone could protest. Pat sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. I'll be right back, he muttered, getting up to follow her. Izuku was left at the table with Barbara and Mike. He knew what was happening. Courtney was going to play hero. With that staff. He'd seen the look in her eye. It was the same look he saw in his own reflection every day. The look of someone who couldn't stand by and do nothing. And he couldn't either. Excuse me, he said politely, standing up. May I use the restroom? Before Barbara could answer, he slipped out of the dining room. He didn't go to the bathroom. He went straight to the basement. His costume was still lying there, a battered symbol of a world he might never see again. But it was his. It was who he was. He couldn't put the whole thing on, but he pulled on the main jumpsuit and his reinforced boots. His gloves were useless, so he left them. He ignored the screaming protest from his shoulder and the deep ache in his muscles. He heard the roar of an engine outside and peered through a basement window. Pat's truck was peeling out of the driveway. He was going after Courtney. Izuku looked around the workshop. He wasn't at 100%. Not even 50. But he couldn't let them go alone. He spotted a dark green hoodie hanging on a hook. It would have to do for a mask. He pulled it on, drawing the hood low over his face. Then, he burst out the basement door and into the cool Nebraska night, following the sound of the sirens. One for all buzzed beneath his skin, that unfamiliar static, a nervous, anxious hum. Downtown Blue Valley was in chaos. Two large, brutish men were in the process of robbing an electronics store. They were clumsy and loud, more bullies than master criminals. But they were effective. One of them had just thrown the store owner through his own plate glass window. Suddenly, a brilliant beam of golden light shot out from a nearby alleyway, striking the ground at the robber's feet and sending up a shower of sparks. Hey! Leave him alone! Courtney, in her makeshift, star-spangled uniform, stepped out of the shadows, the cosmic staff held defensively in front of her. It was her first real confrontation. Her heart was a jackhammer against her ribs. The two thugs looked at each other, then back at her. A slow, mocking grin spread across one of their faces. "Well, look what we have here." Little Girl Scout playing dress-up. "I'm warning you," Courtney said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "Put the stuff back and go." The man laughed. "Or what? You're gonna hit us with your magic wand?" he charged her. Courtney panicked. She swung the staff, intending to just knock him back, but she put too much force into it. The staff connected with his shoulder with a loud crack, sending him sprawling to the ground, howling in pain. The second thug's amusement vanished, replaced by rage. "Why, you little—" He lunged, grabbing the end of the staff. Courtney grunted, trying to wrestle it back, but he was too strong. He yanked it from her grasp and tossed it aside, where it clattered uselessly on the pavement. Courtney's blood ran cold. She was defenseless. The man advanced on her, his fists clenched. "Big mistake, kid." Suddenly, a green blur shot past her. Izuku, hoodie pulled tight, landed between Courtney and the thug. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on the threat, his mind already whirring. Two hostiles. One incapacitated. One advancing. Civilian, Courtney, is unarmed and vulnerable. Objective, neutralize the threat without causing excessive harm. "Get out of the way, punk," the thug snarled. Izuku dropped into a low fighting stance. He could feel one for all crackling, begging to be let loose. But the strange static feeling was still there. He had to be careful. He couldn't risk 100% smash. Not here. Not now. He settled on a manageable, controllable output. 15%. "You should be the one to get out of the way," Izuku said, his voice low and steady. The thug threw a clumsy, powerful punch. Izuku swayed to the side, the blow whistling past his ear. He saw his opening. He drew back his right fist, green lightning arcing from his fingertips up to his shoulder. The air itself seemed to grow heavy, charged with energy. From his approaching truck, Pat Dugan saw the whole thing. He saw Courtney disarmed. He saw the thug moving in. And then he saw the green-haired boy, enveloped in a terrifying, pulsating green aura. Pat's foot slammed on the brake. Detroit smash. Izuku yelled, the familiar words a comforting anchor in the chaos. He didn't aim for the man. He aimed for the air in front of him. He unleashed the power. It wasn't a punch, it was a detonation. A cannon blast of pure, kinetic force erupted from his fist. The shockwave was immense. It ripped across the street, kicking up a tornado of dust and debris. The electronics store's remaining windows imploded. The thug was lifted off his feet and thrown backward, tumbling head over heels until he slammed into the side of a parked car with enough force to dent the door. He slumped to the ground, unconscious. The sudden, violent silence was deafening. The adrenaline faded as quickly as it had come, and the price of his power made itself known. A searing, white-hot pain shot up his arm. He heard a faint, sickening crackle from the bones in his fingers. He cried out, stumbling back and clutching his right hand to his chest, his knuckles already swelling and turning a deep, angry purple. Courtney stared, her mouth agape. She looked from the unconscious forms of the two robbers to the incredible, visible evidence of the boy's power, and the equally incredible, self-inflicted toll it had taken. Pat skidded his truck to a halt and jumped out, his face pale with shock. He had seen superpowers before. He had stood beside Superman, Wonder Woman, and the Flash, but he had never seen power like this in a child. Raw, untamed, and utterly self-destructive. Izuku Midoriya stood panting in the middle of the street, cradling his broken hand, his hooded face pointed toward the ground. He had saved the day. He had been a hero, but as he met the awestruck and terrified gazes of Courtney and Pat, he had never felt more alone. The silence in Pat Dugan's workshop was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. It pressed in on Izuku Midoriya, thick with the scent of motor oil, old coffee, and unspoken recriminations. He sat on the lumpy plaid couch, his newly bandaged right hand resting gingerly in his lap. A masterpiece of Pat's mechanical first aid, It was splintered with what looked suspiciously like a modified set of wrenches and wrapped in enough gauze to mummify a small cat. The pain was a familiar, throbbing drumbeat, a counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of his heart. Courtney stood near the workbench, shifting her weight from foot to foot, refusing to look at her stepfather. The cosmic staff leaned against the wall behind her, its golden light dormant, as if ashamed of the trouble it had caused. Pat was pacing. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back, his heavy work boots echoing on the concrete floor. He wasn't yelling. In Izuku's experience, that was so much worse. The quiet, simmering anger of a disappointed authority figure was 100 times more terrifying than a drill sergeant's shouting. It was Aizawa-sensei's specialty, and this man, this gentle mechanic from another world, had somehow mastered it in a single evening. Finally, he stopped, planting his feet and pinning Izuku with a look that was equal parts fury and raw, undiluted fear. A Detroit smash, Pat said, his voice dangerously low. That's what you called it. You yelled it loud enough for the whole county to hear. Izuku flinched. It's a habit. We're taught to call out our special moves. It helps with branding and... He trailed off, realizing how insane that sounded here. Branding, Pat repeated, the word dripping with disbelief. He ran a greasy hand through his short hair, his knuckles white. Kid, you didn't just stop a robbery. You created a localized hurricane. You shattered windows 30 feet away. You threw a 200-pound man into a car hard enough to deploy the airbag. And you did it all at the cost of shattering your own hand. What in God's name were you thinking? I was thinking that Courtney was in trouble. Izuku shot back, his own frustration bubbling to the surface. He gestured with his good hand toward the girl. That thug disarmed her. He was going to hurt her. I did what I had to do. He saved me, Pat, Courtney interjected, her voice small but firm. You saw him. That guy would have. She couldn't finish the sentence. Pat's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as he looked at her, but then hardened again as it returned to Izuku. I know he did, Court. And I'm grateful. But you two don't get it. This isn't your world, kid. There's no symbol of peace to clean up your mess. There's no government agency to pay for the damages and smooth things over with a press conference. There's just us. And if someone with real power saw what you did tonight, if they saw you... He left the threat hanging in the air, a cold, heavy promise. The weight of his words settled on Izuku. Pat was right. He had acted like he was still in Muzurifu, with the full support system of the hero world behind him. Here, he was just a liability, a walking, talking natural disaster with no off switch. His self-destructive tendencies weren't just a danger to himself anymore. They were a danger to these kind people who had taken him in. Shame washed over him, hot and bitter. I'm sorry, he whispered, looking down at his broken hand. I miscalculated. My power, it feels different here. Unstable. The output was stronger than I anticipated. This seemed to pique Pat's interest, pulling him from anger into analysis. Different how? Izuku took a deep breath, the familiar urge to mutter and dissect a problem taking over. It's like static. Back home, one for all is a smooth current of energy, something I can draw on. Here, it feels like it's fighting me. It sputters. When I used it tonight, it felt like opening a fire hose that had been clogged with gravel. The pressure was there, but it was chaotic, unpredictable. He looked up, his eyes wide with the dawning horror of his own realization. I don't have proper control. Courtney, seeing his distress, moved to his side. It's okay. We'll figure it out. She then turned her attention to the staff. Mine's not exactly working like it's supposed to either. Izuku's head snapped up, his analytical mind latching onto the new data point like a lifeline. You're right. Your support item, the staff. It reacted to me in the woods, and tonight, it seemed to act on its own to protect you, but you couldn't command it against the second attacker. Why? The shift was palpable. One moment he was a remorseful teenager, the next he was a problem solver, his green eyes sharp and focused. The energy in the room changed from a tense debriefing to something else entirely. I need to write this down, Izuku declared, a frantic energy seizing him. Do you have a notebook? A pen? Anything? I need to start cataloging the variables. I can't operate effectively without data. Courtney blinked, taken aback by his sudden intensity, but a small smile touched her lips. She disappeared up the basement stairs and returned a moment later with a fresh, spiral-bound notebook and a blue ballpoint pen. Will this work? Izuku took them with a reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. He clicked the pen, the sound sharp in the quiet workshop, and flipped to the first page. His left hand was clumsy, his handwriting an awkward scrawl compared to his usual neat script, but the words flowed. At the top of the page, he wrote, Hero Analysis for a New World, Volume 1. Beneath it, he began to list his observations. Subject, Self, Izuku Midoriya Deku. Power Source, One for All OFA. Nature, Stockpiled Energy Quirk. Current status in this reality, highly unstable. Sensation, Static Interference. Muted connection to internal reservoir. Control, output is inconsistent. A 15% smash felt closer to 25% in raw force but caused bone damage more consistent with 30 to 35%. Hypothesis. This reality's laws of physics may not be fully compatible with quirk energy, causing dangerous feedback. Vestiges. Connection is extremely faint, almost non-existent. No guidance, no warnings. Am I truly alone in here? Physical condition. Left shoulder dislocation, reduced. Multiple contusions. Right hand, multiple metacarpal fractures. Healing factor seems normal. No rapid UA level recovery. Must be more careful. Cannot rely on recovery girl. He paused, chewing on the end of the pen. Then he turned to Courtney, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that made her take a step back. The staff, he began, the questions tumbling out of him in a rapid-fire stream. You called it the cosmic staff. What's its power source? Is it technology? Or is it like a quirk? Is it sentient? It seems to have a will of its own. What are its maximum energy output limits? Can it operate indefinitely or does it need to recharge? What are its defensive capabilities? Can it create solid light constructs? Does it have a temperature tolerance? Has it ever been damaged? If so, what was the material integrity like? Courtney stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. I don't know. It's magic? Pat said it runs on cosmic energy from the stars. It just knows what to do sometimes. It likes me, I think. It likes you, Izuku repeated, scribbling furiously. Subject, Courtney Whitmore Stargirl? Tentative. Support item, Cosmic Staff. Power source, Cosmic Energy, vague need specifics. A.I/sentience, appears to possess a rudimentary, symbiotic intelligence. Establishes bond with wielder. Emotional component? Note, likes her. Fascinating. So its actions are based on your emotional state. Or your intent, I guess? Courtney shrugged, looking helplessly at Pat. Pat had been watching this entire exchange with a look of growing astonishment. The fear and anger had drained from his face, replaced by a dawning sense of understanding. He wasn't looking at a reckless brawler anymore. He was looking at a strategist. A thinker. He was a mechanic. He understood the drive to take something apart, to see how it worked, to understand its limits and capabilities. This kid, with his crazy power and his broken hand, was doing the exact same thing, but with heroics. He saw a reflection of himself, not in the boy's power, but in his mind. All right, Pat said, his voice now calm and measured. He walked over to a large, dusty metal footlocker in the corner of the workshop, one Izuku hadn't paid much attention to. He knelt and began working the combination on 2 heavy-duty locks. If you want data, kid, I'll give you data. With a heavy thump clank, the locks sprang open. Pat lifted the heavy lid. A wave of musty air, smelling of old paper and leather, washed over the room. Izuku and Courtney leaned in. The chest was filled with dozens of thick, leather-bound files and photo albums. On top of the pile was a large, framed photograph of a group of people in colorful costumes. They stood proudly, an eclectic mix of masks, capes, and strange insignias. They looked powerful, confident. They looked like pro-heroes. Who are they? Courtney asked, her voice a whisper of awe. The Justice Society of America, Pat said, a deep, resonant sadness in his voice. He picked up the photograph, his thumb gently brushing over the face of a man with a confident smile, holding the very same cosmic staff that now leaned against Pat's workbench. The original heroes. He began pulling out files, each one labeled with a name and a symbol. Starman. Hourman. Wildcat. Dr. Midnight. Hawkman. Hawkgirl. The Flash. He handed the first file, the one marked Wildcat, to Izuku. You want to analyze something? Analyze them. Learn from the best. And from their mistakes. For the next 3 days, the workshop became Izuku's sanctuary and his classroom. He barely ate, barely slept. He was consumed. Surrounded by the ghosts of a bygone heroic age, he lost himself in the data. Pat's files were meticulous. They contained everything: news clippings, power analyses, combat reports written in Pat's own hand, technical schematics for their equipment, and deeply personal notes on their personalities, their strengths, and their fatal flaws. Izuku was in heaven. He filled page after page of his new notebook. His clumsy left-handed scrawl gradually became more confident, more urgent. Wildcat, Ted Grant Corkless, but a world-class heavyweight boxer. 9 lives? Metaphysical ability or advanced cellular regeneration? Pat's notes are unclear. Seems to be a literal phenomenon. Fighting style relies on overwhelming close-quarters combat. Aggressive, no wasted movement. Weakness, no ranged options. Susceptible to opponents who can control the battlefield from a distance. A fighter, not a tactician. His greatest strength, his ferocity, was also a predictable liability. Dr. Midnight, Charles McNider, also quirkless. A brilliant surgeon and inventor. Utilizes technological support items. Blackout bombs create total darkness. His special goggles grant him perfect vision within that darkness. Infrared, ultraviolet, X-ray. A genius stealth fighter. Weakness, over-reliance on his technology. If his goggles are compromised, via an EMP, a direct strike, or a light-based attack that overloads the sensors, he is effectively blind. His entire combat style collapses. Our man, Rex Tyler, uses a chemical accelerant, Miraclo, to gain superhuman strength, speed, and durability for exactly 1 hour. An incredible powerhouse. Weakness, the time limit. Utterly predictable. Any villain with a watch could wait him out. Also, notes indicate high addictive potential and psychological side effects. A power that comes from a bottle is a power that can be taken away or turned against the user. He cross-referenced Pat's combat logs of the JSA's final battle with the Injustice Society of America. His muttering became a constant, low hum in the basement. Of course, that's how they did it, he mumbled, his pen flying across the page. The ISA didn't fight them one-on-one. They exploited the matchups. They used Sportsmaster's tactical prowess to counter Wildcat's straightforward aggression. They likely used a light-based villain like the Shade, or a technological saboteur to neutralize Dr. Midnight before the fight even began. They isolated our man, forcing him to burn through his hour on distractions. They didn't beat the JSA's strengths, they attacked their weaknesses. It was a perfectly executed team-based ambush. Pat would come down with sandwiches and coffee, finding the boy asleep on the couch, surrounded by a fortress of open files, his face smudged with ink. He'd listen to Izuku's frantic, brilliant analyses and find himself nodding in agreement, seeing the old battles in a new, terrifyingly clear light. The kid wasn't just reading history. He was reverse engineering a tragedy. You see it, don't you? Pat said one afternoon, watching Izuku diagram the final battle on a whiteboard. They were amazing heroes, Izuku said, not turning around. Each of them was as strong as a top 10 pro in my world. But they fought like individuals, not like a team. Not a real one. The ISA fought like a single unit, with a single, brutal goal. That was the difference. In that moment, Pat's last reservations about the boy from another world evaporated. This kid was more than just a weapon. He was an asset. Maybe, just maybe, he was exactly what they needed. The break in the obsessive research came on the 4th day. Pat returned from his auto shop, his face grim. He tossed the thin manila folder onto the workbench where Izuku and Courtney were examining the schematics for Dr. Midnight's goggles. Got a lead, Pat announced. Those two goons from the robbery. The one you didn't knock into next week woke up this morning with a bad case of amnesia and a worse case of wanting a lawyer. But before that, I had a buddy at the impound lot check the car the other one dented. It wasn't his. It's registered to an LLC. So? Courtney asked, looking up from the schematics. So that LLC is a subsidiary of a larger corporation called the American Dream, Pat continued, his voice tight. And the American Dream is a community development company that's been buying up half the property in Blue Valley. Its CEO is a man named Jordan Mocant. He paused, letting the name sink in. Izuku recognized it from the files. Icicle. But that's not all, Pat said. The man who pays the bills for that specific LLC, the man who signs the checks, is Blue Valley's very own councilman, William Zarek. A picture of a smarmy, well-dressed politician flashed in Izuku's mind, pulled from another of Pat's files. The wizard. Master of illusion and deception. So Zarek hired those thugs, Courtney concluded, her hands balling into fists. What for? To make a scene? To steal some TVs? It doesn't make sense, Izuku muttered, already starting a new page in his notebook. A member of a high-level villain organization wouldn't use local muscle for a simple smash and grab. It's too sloppy, too loud. It draws attention. Unless that was the point. A distraction? Pat offered. Or a test, Izuku countered, his eyes dark with thought. They were testing the waters. Seeing if Blue Valley had any defenses. He looked at Courtney. They were looking for you. The reality of the situation crashed down on Courtney. This wasn't just about avenging Starman anymore. The bad guys were here. Now. And they were looking for her. She sank onto a stool, her confident bravado from a few nights ago gone, replaced by a flicker of fear. That night, Izuku couldn't sleep. The pain in his hand was a dull ache, but the turmoil in his mind was a raging storm. He quietly made his way down to the workshop, the moonlight filtering through the high basement windows casting long shadows across the room. He found Courtney already there, sitting on the floor, holding the cosmic staff across her lap. It wasn't glowing, but she stroked its smooth, metallic surface as if it were a pet. Couldn't sleep either? She asked, not looking up. Too much on my mind, Izuku admitted, sitting on the edge of the couch. He gestured to the battered green costume folded on the stool. A piece of his world, looking so alien and fragile here. I keep thinking about home. A heavy silence fell between them. This is all my fault, Courtney said finally, her voice thick with emotion. I took the staff. I went out there. I dragged you into this. Now those villains are looking for us. You didn't drag me into anything, Courtney, Izuku said gently. I jumped in. It's what I do. He looked at his bandaged hand. It's all I know how to do. He finally let the dam of his composure crack, just a little. Back home, I inherited my power. It was given to me by my hero, the greatest hero in the world, All Might. It's not just a quirk, it's a legacy, a torch that's been passed down from one generation to the next for almost 200 years. 8 people held this power before me. 8 people fought and bled and died to protect it. And he chose me, a quirkless, useless kid who just wanted to be a hero more than anything. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. Every single day, I'm terrified. Terrified that I'm not strong enough. That I'm not smart enough. That I'm going to be the one who lets the flame go out. That I'll fail everyone who believed in me. Courtney looked up, her own eyes shining with unshed tears. My dad, she began, her voice cracking. Starman. I never really knew him, but I found this staff, and I found out who he was, and for the first time, I felt like I had a purpose. Like I could be someone he'd be proud of. But I'm not him. I'm just a clumsy kid from California who can't even get his magic stick to work right. What if I'm not worthy of it? What if I fail him? Izuku looked at her, at this girl from another universe who was carrying a burden so similar to his own. The pressure of legacy. The fear of not being enough. In that shared, vulnerable moment, the vast chasm between their worlds disappeared, leaving only 2 kids trying to carry the weight of impossible ideals. He offered her a small, watery smile. I don't think that's how it works. We don't have to be them. All Might told me that I have to make one for all my own power. Maybe you just have to make the staff your own too. He stood up, his body aching, and walked over to his folded costume. He picked it up, the rough, familiar fabric a comfort in his hands. I don't know if I'll ever get back home, he said, his voice quiet but filled with a new, steely resolve. I don't know if I'll ever see my friends or my mentor again. But I know one thing. He turned to face her, his green eyes burning with the unwavering fire of a true hero. As long as I'm here, I can't just stand by while people are in danger. I can't just hide in this basement and wait for a way back. This William Zarek, the Injustice Society, they're a threat, and you're going to fight them. So I'm going to fight them with you. He looked down at the notebook on the workbench, filled with his analysis, his plans, his hope. Until I can find a way to be the symbol of peace for my world again, he declared, I'll just have to be a hero for yours. The dawn that broke over Blue Valley, Nebraska, was crisp and deceptively peaceful. Sunlight, the color of pale honey, streamed through the high basement windows of the Dugan Whitmore home, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like lazy, glittering fairies. For Izuku Midoriya, it was the fourth morning he had woken up in another world, and the novelty had long since curdled into a persistent, low-grade ache of anxiety. He sat on the plaid couch, his meticulously detailed notebook open in his lap. His fractured right hand was now encased in a more professional-looking brace Pat had fashioned from lightweight aluminum and padded leather, a testament to the mechanic's surprising skill with custom fabrication. His left hand, however, was cramping from the sheer volume of writing he had done. He was on page 37 of Hero Analysis for a New World, and he felt he had barely scratched the surface. The JSA files were a treasure trove, a puzzle he was slowly piecing together. But information was useless without action. The knowledge that a cabal of supervillains was embedded in this sleepy town like a nest of hornets was a ticking clock in the back of his mind. The basement door creaked open and Courtney descended the stairs, already dressed for school. There was a new energy about her, a restless fire in her eyes that hadn't been there before their late-night conversation. The shared vulnerability had forged a bond between them, a quiet understanding that transcended worlds. She was no longer just a girl with a magic stick, she was a kindred spirit, buckling under the weight of a legacy she was terrified to tarnish. Morning, she said, grabbing an apple from a bowl on the workbench. I've been thinking. Izuku looked up from his notes on the wizard's recorded illusions. That's a dangerous pastime. She ignored his attempt at humor, her expression deadly serious. She walked over to the footlocker and pulled out the framed photograph of the original Justice Society of America. Look at them, she said, her voice filled with a mixture of reverence and frustration. There were 9 of them in this picture. 9 heroes. We're just 2 kids and a guy with a giant robot suit he hasn't used in 10 years. Pat, coming down the stairs with 2 mugs of coffee, grunted. Hey, STRIP is a state-of-the-art machine, I'll have you know. Just needs a little tune-up. My point, Courtney continued undeterred, is that we're outman. You said it yourself, Izuku. The Issei won because they were a team. So we need a team too. Pat set a mug down for Izuku, the coffee's rich aroma a welcome comfort. Courtney, we've been over this. You can't just go around asking teenagers to risk their lives fighting supercriminals. These aren't playground bullies. These are killers. And we're just going to let them win? She challenged, her voice rising. Let them do whatever it is they're planning with their Project New America. We have the gear. The JSA left it behind for a reason. They wanted their legacy to continue. She's right, Pat-san, Izuku said softly, closing his notebook. Pat and Courtney both turned to look at him. A single hero, no matter how powerful, has blind spots. Strengths can become predictable weaknesses. A team covers those weaknesses. All Might is the strongest hero in the world, but even he has allies he relies on. He looked at Pat, his expression earnest. But you are also right. Recruitment requires a careful strategy. We can't just ask anyone. We need the right people. Courtney's eyes lit up. Exactly. And I know who to start with. She pointed to the file Izuku had been studying just yesterday. The one marked with a clawed insignia. We need a new wildcat. Pat sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. You mean Yolanda Montes? The name hung in the air. Izuku had been in Blue Valley High for 3 days, a quiet, observant ghost in the hallways. He had seen Yolanda Montes. He had seen the way the other students parted before her like she was a leper, the way they whispered behind their hands as she passed. He'd seen the hard, defensive shell she wore like armor, and the deep, wounded pain in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. He had cross-referenced what he'd seen with the school's online news archives. The story was ugly and all too common. A private photo leaked by a boy she trusted, a promising future as class president and star student shattered in an instant of digital betrayal. Absolutely not, Pat said firmly. That girl has been through enough. The last thing she needs is to be dragged into this. It's the first thing she needs. Courtney argued. She's a boxer. She's tough. She's angry. She's perfect. That anger is a wound, Courtney, Pat countered. You can't build a hero on that. I disagree, Izuku said, standing up. All eyes turned to him. He opened his notebook to his analysis of Ted Grant. The original Wildcat was a world champion boxer who had his career ruined when he was framed by his own managers. He had everything taken from him. He became Wildcat because he had nothing left to lose and a deep, burning need for justice. He channeled his rage, his feeling of betrayal, into something productive. Something heroic. He then flipped to a new, mostly blank page, with Yolanda's name at the top. Yolanda Montes, she's in the same position. She's been pushed into a corner by her peers, her family, by everyone. That kind of person, if you give them a purpose, if you give them a target for their anger that isn't themselves, they can become the most dedicated, the most ferocious ally you'll ever have. He looked at Courtney, his gaze direct and serious. But Pat San is right about one thing. You can't just hand her a costume and expect her to thank you. This isn't about giving her a gift. It's about offering her a chance. A chance to fight back. To reclaim her own narrative. You have to approach this with empathy, not just enthusiasm. Courtney nodded, though Izuku could see the tactical nuances of his advice were secondary to the sheer excitement of her plan. She was going to do this her way, and Izuku knew, with a sinking feeling, that it was going to go very, very wrong. The Blue Valley High School cafeteria was a jungle, and the social hierarchy was the law of the land. Jocks at one table, cheerleaders at another, theater kids, band nerds, outcasts. Each group occupied its own rigidly defined territory. Yolanda Montes sat alone, as she always did, at a small table near the emergency exit, as if subconsciously planning her escape. Her lunch sat untouched in front of her. Her focus was entirely on her phone, her shoulders hunched in a defensive posture that dared the world to approach. Izuku sat 3 tables away, pretending to read a history textbook. He watched as Courtney, holding her lunch tray like a shield, marched across the cafeteria with the subtlety of a charging rhino. She radiated a nervous, over-caffeinated energy that made him want to shrink in his seat. Too direct, he thought, his inner analyst wincing. She hasn't established a rapport. She's breaking social protocol. This is a tactical error. Courtney slid into the seat opposite Yolanda, who looked up from her phone with an expression of startled annoyance. Yolanda, hi. I'm Courtney, she began, her voice a little too loud. A few heads at nearby tables turned. I know who you are, Yolanda said flatly, her gaze flicking back to her screen. The message was clear, go away. Courtney, bless her optimistic heart, was completely immune to the message. Right. So, listen, this is going to sound crazy, but I think you and I were meant to find each other. I have this opportunity for you. Something that could change everything. Yolanda finally put her phone down, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. What are you talking about? With a complete lack of discretion, Courtney unzipped her backpack and pulled out the Wildcat suit, laying the dark, leather-clad costume on the table between them. The sleek cowl, with its pointed ears and retractable claws glinting under the fluorescent lights, looked utterly alien amidst the milk cartons and sandwich wrappers. The ripple effect was instantaneous. Conversations at nearby tables faltered. Students began to stare openly, their whispers a venomous hiss. For Yolanda, it was a waking nightmare. She was, once again, the center of unwanted, mocking attention. What is that? She hissed, her face a mask of horrified fury. Is this a joke? Are you making fun of me? No. Of course not, Courtney said, completely misreading the situation. It's a costume. For a superhero. You could be a hero, Yolanda. You could be Wildcat. The name hung in the air, ridiculous and absurd. Yolanda looked from the costume to Courtney's earnest, smiling face, and something inside her snapped. The pain and humiliation of the past few months coalesced into a single, white-hot point of rage. A hero? She spat, her voice trembling. You want me to put on a costume and run around in the dark? Is that your brilliant solution? You think a mask is going to fix my life? Henry and Cindy ruined my life, and you show up with a Halloween costume and expect me to be grateful? She stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. You're just like them. You think I'm a joke. Stay away from me. She grabbed her tray, dumped it in the nearest trash can with a clatter, and fled the cafeteria, leaving Courtney sitting alone at the table with the costume, the eyes of the entire school burning into her. Izuku closed his textbook with a soft sigh. He felt a deep pang of empathy, not just for Yolanda's public agony, but for Courtney's public failure. She had meant well, but good intentions, without understanding, were just another way to cause pain. He found her later that day, after the final bell. Yolanda was stuffing books into her locker with a furious, jerky energy, trying to get out of the building before anyone else could corner her. Izuku approached quietly, keeping a respectful distance. He wasn't carrying a costume, or an offer, or a sales pitch. He was just there. Montez-san, he said softly. She slammed her locker shut, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. She whirled on him, her eyes blazing. If you're here to talk about your crazy blonde friend, you can save your breath. I'm not, he said, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. I'm here to apologize. For her. She was out of line. Yolanda's defensive posture eased, just a fraction. She looked at him, the strange, quiet transfer student from Japan, and saw none of the pity or mockery she was used to. She just saw sincerity. Why do you care? She asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Because I know what it's like, he said, his gaze dropping to the floor. To have everyone look at you and only see one thing. She scoffed. You're the new kid. Nobody even knows who you are. You have no idea what it's like, don't I? He asked, meeting her eyes again. The pain in his own was so raw, so genuine, it stopped her cold. Before I came to America, before I got my power, I was nothing. I was born different from everyone else. Powerless in a world full of power. Everyone told me I was useless. That I could never achieve my dream. They didn't even say my name. They just called me Deku, the one who can't do anything. They wrote me off. They whispered behind my back. They looked at me with pity, or with contempt. He took a small step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. That's a kind of cage, isn't it? When people decide who you are for you. When they take away your name, and replace it with a label. Quirkless. Slut. It doesn't matter what the word is. It matters that it isn't your choice. It's a cage they build around you, and every day they add another bar just by looking at you. Yolanda stared at him, her throat tight. He understood. This quiet, freckled boy from halfway around the world somehow understood the precise shape of her private hell. The anger drained out of her, leaving behind a deep, weary sorrow. So what's your point? She asked, her voice barely audible. That life sucks and then you die? No, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. My point is that the only way out of that cage is to build your own door. Courtney's approach was wrong. She's impulsive, and she doesn't always think things through. But her heart is in the right place. That suit she showed you, she thinks it's about being a hero, about fighting bad guys. She doesn't get the most important part. He paused, letting his words sink in. It's not about hiding your face. It's about choosing a new one. A face that you control. Wildcat isn't just a costume. It's a choice. A choice to be defined by what you do from now on, not by what was done to you. A chance to take all that anger, all that pain, and aim it at something that actually deserves it. He didn't push. He didn't ask her to join. He simply held out the truth as he saw it, a fragile offering. The choice is yours, he said, giving her a slight, respectful bow. Either way, I'm sorry for what happened at lunch. He turned and walked away, leaving Yolanda alone in the silent hallway, the echo of his words resonating deep in her soul. Night fell, and with it, a sense of dread. The Dugan's pit stop was an island of harsh, fluorescent light in the encroaching darkness. Pat was working on a stubborn engine block, his movements tense and jerky. Courtney was listlessly sweeping the floor, replaying her disastrous lunch with Yolanda over and over in her head. Izuku was sitting at Pat's desk, sketching modifications for his own costume in his notebook, adding reinforced plating, improving flexibility. A way to feel in control of something. I really messed up, didn't I? Courtney said, breaking the strained silence. You had good intentions, Pat said, not looking up from the engine. But people are more complicated than spark plugs. He was right, she murmured, glancing at Izuku. I was just so excited, I didn't even think about how she would feel. Before anyone could reply, a sharp thwack echoed through the garage. A pristine white baseball, impossibly fast, shot through one of the high windows, shattering the glass. It ricocheted off a metal toolbox and embedded itself in the wall just inches from Pat's head. They all froze. Get down! Pat yelled, shoving Courtney behind the chassis of the car. Another sound. Scrapey. The sinister sound of sharp claws dragging along the metal roll-up door of the main bay. Then, a voice, dripping with a cheerful, terrifying menace, called out from the darkness outside. Stripsy! Long time no see. We heard you had some new company. We just wanted to stop by and say hello. Izuku's blood ran cold. He recognized the name from the files. Lawrence Crusher Croc. Codename, Sportsmaster. Master of all athletic-based combat. Sadistic. Enjoys the game. A second voice, female, silky, and just as deadly, joined the first. You've been a bad boy, Pat. Keeping secrets from your old friends. Jordan doesn't like secrets. Paula Brooks. Codename Tigress. Master Hunter and Tracker. Prefers bladed weapons. Vicious. The main lights in the garage suddenly flickered and died, plunging them into a near-total darkness broken only by a single emergency light above the office door. They cut the power, Izuku whispered, his mind racing. 2 hostiles. ISA enforcers. This isn't a test. This is a targeted assassination. Or a warning. A hockey puck, glowing with a faint chemical light, suddenly shot through another window. It bounced off the floor, the walls, the ceiling, a dizzying, unpredictable projectile. Pat tackled Izuku, pulling him to the ground just as the puck zipped through the air where his head had been. It slammed into a fuse box with a shower of sparks and a loud bang. We need to get to SDRIP. Pat yelled, crawling toward the massive, tarp-covered shape in the back of the garage. A figure dropped from the rafters, landing with a cat-like grace between Pat and the robot. It was Tigress. Her crossbow was already aimed at his chest. Another figure, broad and imposing, stepped through the shattered window. Sportsmaster casually tossed an explosive javelin from hand to hand. Sportsmaster chided. No toys for you, sidekick. Courtney, seeing Pat in danger, acted on instinct. With a defiant yell, she summoned the cosmic staff. It flew into her hand, illuminating the garage with its brilliant golden light. She fired a blast of energy at Sportsmaster, who simply sidestepped it with athletic ease. Ooh, feisty, Tigress purred, turning her attention to Courtney. The fight was immediate and brutal. Pat, unarmed, was forced on the defensive, using his knowledge of the garage to duck and weave between tool chests and car lifts. But Sportsmaster was relentless, hurting him, toying with him. Courtney found herself facing Tigress, whose speed and ferocity were terrifying. The staff was powerful, but Courtney was clumsy, her movements wide and untrained. Tigress flowed around her attacks, her claws flashing, leaving long, shallow cuts on Courtney's arms. Izuku watched for 2 critical seconds, his mind processing the battle with frantic speed. They're too good. Their synergy is perfect. They're separating their targets. Pat is outmatched. Courtney is panicking. My power is unstable. A wide-area attack could bring the whole roof down. I need to be precise. He pushed off the ground, a flicker of green lightning enveloping him. He charged toward Tigress, aiming to relieve the pressure on Courtney. But Sportsmaster, without even looking, threw a discus that intercepted him mid-stride. Izuku was forced to abort his attack, twisting in the air to avoid the projectile. He landed awkwardly, his injured shoulder screaming in protest. Tigress used the opening. She disarmed Courtney with a swift kick, sending the staff skittering across the floor. She lunged, her claws aimed at Courtney's throat, and then, a black shape dropped from the ceiling beams directly onto Tigress's back. It was Yolanda Montez, clad head to toe in the sleek, dark wildcat suit. She moved with a raw, desperate fury, her new claws extended. She was all instinct, a whirlwind of rage given form. She raked her claws across Tigress's back, eliciting a surprised hiss of pain from the villain. Tigress snarled, throwing Yolanda off, and the two became a blur of motion, a deadly dance of kicks and claws. At the same time, the side door to the garage burst open. A green-clad figure stood silhouetted against the night. Izuku, his hero costume on, his face grim. "Sorry I'm late," he said, the green lightning of One for All crackling around him at a low, controlled hum. "Had to change." He didn't wait for a response. He shot forward, intercepting Sportsmaster as he advanced on the now free Pat. The dynamic of the fight had completely changed. It was 2-on-2, with Pat providing support, throwing wrenches and oil slicks to disrupt the villain's footing. But the ISA agents were still better. Their years of experience and perfect teamwork were overwhelming. They're too synchronized. Izuku yelled, ducking under a swing from an explosive bat. He saw Sportsmaster make a subtle hand signal to Tigress. They're telegraphing their moves. He leads with his left, she follows with a low strike. "Watch the pattern," Yolanda heard him. The next time Tigress lunged after one of Sportsmaster's attacks, she was ready. She dropped low, sweeping Tigress's legs out from under her. It was the first clean hit she'd landed. The small victory was short-lived. Sportsmaster, enraged, turned his full attention on the new Wildcat. He was too fast, too strong. He caught her with a vicious blow from a lacrosse stick, sending her crashing into a stack of tires. Izuku saw the opening Sportsmaster had left. He knew he needed to create distance, to give them a chance to regroup. The risk was enormous, but he had no choice. He pushed his power, feeling the familiar, painful strain shoot up his arm. The unstable static of One for All roared in his ears. He planted his feet and flicked the fingers of his good hand. Delaware smash! A cannon of compressed air ripped through the garage. It wasn't aimed at Sportsmaster, but at the wall behind him. The force of the blast was staggering. It knocked the villain off his feet and sent a cascade of heavy tools and equipment crashing down, creating a makeshift barrier. But the strain was too much. The unstable power, combined with the desperate emotional state, triggered something new. Something deep within One for All. With a sensation like tearing muscle, thick, black, whip-like tendrils of pure energy erupted from his right arm, writhing like angry snakes. They were not entirely solid, crackling with a dark, volatile light. Izuku stared at his own arm in utter shock and horror. What is this? A new quirk? Now, the tendrils had a will of their own. One lashed out, smashing a heavy workbench into splinters. Another struck the concrete floor, cracking it like porcelain. Everyone froze. Courtney stared, amazed. Pat's face was a mask of pure terror. Even Sportsmaster and Tigress, battle-hardened killers, were momentarily stunned by this bizarre, terrifying new development. Izuku fought for control, his teeth gritted. The tendrils felt alien, an intrusion. He focused his will, pouring all his concentration into reining them in. Slowly, painfully, they receded back into his arm, leaving him panting and trembling, his control over One for All feeling more fragile than ever. That moment of shock was the only opening they were going to get. Now! Izuku screamed, his voice raw. We have to go. Now! Pat didn't hesitate. He grabbed Courtney, who scooped up the staff, and pulled her toward the back office. Izuku shoved a stunned Yolanda after them. They piled into the small, cramped room, slamming and bolting the reinforced door just as Sportsmaster's javelin embedded itself in the steel. The back window! Pat yelled, fumbling with the latch. They scrambled out into the cool night air, running blindly into the darkness of the alley behind the garage, the sounds of the enraged villains smashing through the office door fading behind them. They didn't stop running until they were several blocks away, hidden in the deep shadows of a city park. They collapsed behind a set of bleachers, chests heaving, bodies bruised and bleeding. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind the cold, stark reality of what had just happened. They were alive. They had survived. Pat leaned against the metal frame, his face buried in his hands. Courtney was tending to a cut on Yolanda's arm with a piece of her own torn shirt. Izuku was staring at his right arm, flexing his fingers, half expecting the black tendrils to burst forth again. Yolanda finally looked down at her gloved hands, at the faint outline of the retracted claws. She touched her masked face. She had been terrified. She had been hurt. But for the first time in months, she hadn't felt like a victim. She had fought back. The four of them sat in silence for a long moment, a collection of bruises and fractured nerves. They were a mess. They were in over their heads. They had almost died, but they had done it together. Courtney finally broke the silence, a weary, battered, but undeniably determined smile touching her lips. She looked from Yolanda's fierce, newly awakened eyes to Izuku's worried but resolute face. "So," she said, her voice raspy, "I guess we're a team now." The aftermath of the attack on the garage was a study in controlled chaos. Pat Dugan's workshop, once a sanctuary of orderly mechanical clutter, now looked like it had been the epicenter of a localized tornado. Tools were scattered, machinery was overturned, and the air hung thick with the acrid smell of ozone and something that smelled suspiciously like burned hockey puck. The four of them, Pat, Courtney, Izuku, and a still silent, shell-shocked Yolanda, had crept back after sunrise to assess the damage. The unspoken conclusion was damning. They were no longer just investigating a conspiracy. They were at war. And they were losing. "They knew where to find me," Pat said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble as he surveyed the wreckage. "They knew about STRIP. This wasn't a random hit. This was personal. They were toying with us," Yolanda added, her voice rough. She touched a long, shallow scratch on her forearm that had bled through her jacket. The wildcat suit was hidden away, but the memory of the fight was etched onto her skin. If they had wanted to kill us, they would have. Izuku, his notebook open, was sketching the scene from memory, diagramming the villain's attack patterns and his own uncontrolled Black Whip manifestation. It was a message, he concluded, not looking up. A demonstration of power. They were showing us the disparity in our abilities. They're confident. Overconfident, maybe. That's a weakness we can exploit, but only if we have more resources. Courtney, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke, her voice ringing with a desperate conviction. "Then we need more resources. We need more people. Izuku, you said it yourself, a team covers its weaknesses. Right now we're all offense. We need a brain. We need a tank." She strode over to the JSA footlocker, which had miraculously survived the onslaught, and pulled out 2 more files. One was marked with a stylized hourglass, the other with an owl. "Our man. Dr. Midnight." "No," Pat said immediately, the word flat and non-negotiable. "Absolutely not. Rick Tyler and Beth Chappell? Court, they're just kids. So are we." Courtney shot back, her frustration boiling over. "Look around, Pat. We can't do this on our own. Rick's dad was our man. Beth lives across the street from the McNiders' old house. It's destiny. It's a coincidence," Pat retorted, his voice rising. "Rick Tyler is a powder keg waiting for a match. You've seen his file. He's angry, he's violent, and he has a juvenile record a mile long. And Beth Chappell is... Beth. She's sweet, but she's not a fighter. You'd be putting them both in mortal danger. We're already in mortal danger." As they argued, Izuku picked up the files. He scanned the information on the children of the original JSA members, his analytical mind cross-referencing their profiles with what little he had observed of them at school. Rick Tyler. Parents, Rex and Wendy Tyler, killed in a staged car accident orchestrated by the ISA. Now lives with his emotionally distant uncle. Exhibits extreme antisocial behavior. Prone to violent outbursts. carries a deep-seated rage. Potential powerhouse, but highly unstable. A glass cannon, Beth Chapel. A social outcast, but for different reasons than Yolanda. Overly enthusiastic, talkative, lacks social awareness. Desperate for friendship. Highly intelligent, observant. Her parents are workaholics, leaving her feeling isolated and lonely. A non-combatant, but potential for intelligence and support roles. They're both isolated, Izuku said quietly, cutting through the argument. Pat and Courtney stopped, turning to look at him. Like Yolanda. Like me in a way. The Aisei didn't just kill their parents, they orphaned them. They took away their support systems. Rick Tyler pushes people away with anger. Beth Chapel tries to pull them in with desperate friendliness. They're two sides of the same lonely coin. He looked at Courtney. You're right. We need them. But Pat is also right. We can't just throw them into a fight. Their recruitment has to be handled with extreme care. Especially Rick. Courtney, seeing a path to victory, seized the opportunity. Okay. So we'll be careful. Izuku and I will handle Beth. She's smart, she'll love the tech. Pat, you and Yolanda can handle Rick. You know, tough guy to tough guy. Yolanda, who had been leaning against the workbench, pushed off the wall. Whoa, hold on. Why do I have to go talk to the angry greaser? Because you get it, Courtney said, her voice softening. You get what it's like to be angry at the whole world. You can talk to him. Pat looked like he wanted to argue further, but the logic, however flawed, was undeniable. He sighed, the sound of a man surrendering to the inevitable tide of teenage determination. Fine. But if this goes sideways, we pull the plug. Immediately. Beth Chapel was exactly as Izuku's analysis had predicted, and yet so much more. She was a whirlwind of relentless, unfiltered enthusiasm. When Courtney and Izuku approached her at her locker, she launched into a breathless, non-stop monologue about her parents' business trip, a documentary she'd seen about migratory bird patterns in Bolivia, and the surprisingly high sugar content in the cafeteria's orange juice. Courtney, trying to steer the conversation, kept interrupting with clumsy segues about secret societies and special goggles, each attempt causing Beth's eyes to widen with a confused but delighted interest. Izuku, meanwhile, was observing. He saw the way she adjusted her glasses, the way her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her backpack. He saw the flicker of hope in her eyes every time she thought she was making a real connection, and the subtle droop of her shoulders when the conversation moved on without her. She wasn't just talkative, she was broadcasting on every frequency, desperate for someone, anyone, to tune in. Finally, Courtney just gave up on subtlety. Beth, do you want to see something really, really cool? They led her to the abandoned McNider house, a place Beth admitted she'd always been curious about. In the dusty, forgotten study, Courtney presented her with the Dr. Midnight goggles. They were sleek, brass and leather objects, looking like something out of a steampunk fantasy. Beth's reaction was instantaneous and utterly pure. Oh wow! Are these vintage aviator specs? The craftsmanship is exquisite. Is this real brass? The patina suggests a copper tin alloy with a high zinc content. And the lenses, they're polarized, but there's a crystalline matrix embedded within the glass. What is their function? While Courtney tried to explain the concept of seeing in the dark, Izuku stepped forward. They're more than that, he said, tapping the side of the goggles. The original owner was a doctor and an inventor. My hypothesis is that these aren't just for infrared and ultraviolet vision. They're a data processing unit. A wearable computer. He had her complete and undivided attention. A wearable computer? From the 1940s? That's decades ahead of its time. How would it interface? There's no visible output, no wiring. It interfaces directly with the user, Izuku explained. The crystalline matrix in the lenses likely projects data onto the user's retina. But more than that, I think it has an integrated AI, an artificial intelligence that can access information, analyze threats, and provide tactical data in real time. Beth gently took the goggles from Courtney, her fingers tracing their intricate design. An AI, she whispered, her voice filled with a reverence Izuku usually reserved for All Might. A friend, made of data. She slipped them on. For a moment, nothing happened. Beth's face fell, the familiar specter of disappointment looming. Oh. I guess they don't work anymore. Then, a flicker of blue light danced across the lenses. A calm, synthesized male voice spoke, seemingly from nowhere, yet audible to everyone in the room. Identity confirmed. Charles McNider. Welcome back, Doctor, Beth gasped, stumbling backward. Who said that? Did you hear that? We heard it, Courtney said, her eyes wide. Correction, the voice continued, a hint of digital confusion in its tone. Biometric skin does not match Dr. McNider's profile. You are not Charles. Who are you? Beth froze, her mind clearly racing. This was her moment. A real conversation with someone, or something, that was actually listening. I'm Beth, she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Beth Chappell. Chappell, Beth, the AI repeated. A new user. Fascinating. My designation is Chuck. I was Dr. McNider's assistant. It appears I have been dormant for some time. My chronometer is offline. What is the current star date? Beth giggled, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. We don't really use star dates. It's October 9th, 2020. Izuku watched the exchange, a small smile on his face. This was a perfect match. Beth didn't just get a support item, she got a friend. A partner who would listen to her every word and value her every thought. They hadn't just recruited an intelligence officer, they had given a lonely girl a purpose. The first recruitment was a success. The second recruitment was a catastrophe. Rick Tyler's house was a grim, silent monument to neglect. The lawn was overgrown, the paint was peeling, and a souped-up muscle car, a '66 Mustang, sat in the driveway like a slumbering beast. Pat and Yolanda found Rick in the backyard, methodically, brutally, beating the hell out of a rusty oil drum with a baseball bat. He was all coiled rage and simmering resentment. His muscles were corded under a grease-stained t-shirt, and his face was set in a permanent scowl. He was the physical embodiment of a clenched fist. Pat, ever the gentle giant, tried to open with a friendly, neighborly approach. Hey Rick. I'm Pat Dugan. Your dad and we used to, work together. Rick didn't stop swinging. The bat connected with the barrel with a deafening clang. My dad's dead, he grunted between swings. So is my mom. Don't know you. Yolanda, seeing Pat's approach failing, stepped forward. Your dad was a hero, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. He was our man. Rick finally stopped. He slowly turned, the bat resting on his shoulder. His eyes, cold and hard, swept over them. What did you just say? Your father was part of a team called the Justice Society of America, Pat explained, holding out the old hourglass-shaped locket. He used this to give himself super strength for 1 hour at a time. He fought bad guys. He saved people. Rick stared at the locket, then laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound with no humor in it. My old man? A hero? That's rich. My old man was a boring insurance salesman who got drunk and wrapped his car around a tree. That's the story everyone knows. That's the story my uncle tells me every time he bothers to look at me. It was a lie, Rick, Pat said, his voice pleading. The Injustice Society killed them. They made it look like an accident. We have proof. Rick's knuckles were white on the handle of the bat. Injustice Society? Our man? You people are insane. You think I'm going to believe some fairy tale because you show up with a cheap piece of jewelry? He took a menacing step forward. Get off my property. Now, we're not insane, Yolanda said, her own temper flaring. We're telling you the truth. The people who killed your parents are still out there. In this town. Don't you want to do something about it? Don't you want revenge? She had said the magic word. Revenge. Rick's eyes narrowed. The rage that was always simmering just beneath the surface now boiled over. Revenge? He spat. You think I need you for revenge? I don't need a stupid locket or a costume. All I need is this. He brandished the bat. That's not enough, Rick. Yolanda shot back. We fought them. They're not just thugs. They're monsters. I'm not afraid of any monsters, he snarled. It was then that his uncle, a thin, weaselly man with a perpetually sour expression, came out onto the back porch. Rick! Who the hell are these people? I told you, no friends over here. Rick whirled on him. They're not my friends. And you're not my father. You're damn right I'm not. His uncle yelled back. I'm just the poor sap who got stuck with a worthless, delinquent time bomb for a nephew. That was the spark. The final insult. With a guttural roar of pure, animalistic fury, Rick turned and swung the bat not at the barrel, but at the back of his prized Mustang. The metal of the trunk buckled with a horrific screech, leaving a massive dent. He swung again, shattering the rear windshield into 1,000 glittering pieces. He was destroying the one thing he seemed to care about, a physical manifestation of his own self-loathing. Pat and Yolanda could only watch in horrified silence as he screamed his rage at the sky, a boy broken by a world that had taken everything from him. The recruitment was a disastrous, spectacular failure. Back in the workshop, the mood was funereal. Beth, goggles perched on her head, was chattering excitedly to Chuck, who was absorbing every piece of data from the JSA files Izuku had scanned for him. But their cheerful bubble of discovery was a stark contrast to the grim reality the rest of them faced. I told you it was a bad idea, Pat said, pacing the floor. The kid is a wrecking ball. It was my fault, Yolanda said, slumped on the couch. I pushed him. I said the wrong thing. Izuku, however, was staring at the whiteboard, where he had written Rick's profile. No, he said, tapping the word's deep-seated rage. You said the right thing? You just said it at the wrong time, in the wrong place. His rage isn't the problem. It's the key. But right now, it has no target, so it's imploding. He's destroying himself. We need to give him a target. And how are we supposed to do that? Courtney asked, dejected. He won't listen to us. Query. Chuck's synthesized voice piped up from Beth's goggles. The subject, Richard Tyler, has a history of targeting the assets of a corporation known as the American Dream. He has been cited for vandalism at 3 of their construction sites. Everyone stopped and looked at Beth. Chuck's been cross-referencing school records with public arrest reports and property damage claims, she explained, beaming. He's a very fast reader. Izuku's eyes lit up. Of course. He's been fighting them all along, in his own way. He just didn't know who he was fighting. He feels, on a subconscious level, that this corporation is the source of his misery. The American Dream, that's Jordan Machin's company. Icicle's company. It's all connected. A plan began to form in his mind, intricate and dangerous. We can't convince him with words. We have to show him. We need to give him a clear and present enemy. He turned to Pat. The American Dream's main office. What's the security like? Pat paled. You're not seriously suggesting. It's a fortress, Chuck's voice interjected. Motion sensors, pressure plates, heat-sensitive cameras, and a 24-hour private security detail. Then a frontal assault is out of the question, Izuku continued, grabbing a marker and striding to the whiteboard. We need to infiltrate. Quietly. We need information, blueprints, project timelines, anything that tells us what Project New America really is. And we need something to convince Rick. This is insane, Pat muttered, but he was already looking at the schematics for SDRIP, a thoughtful expression on his face. The plan was set into motion the following night. It was a multi-stage operation that relied on perfect timing and a significant amount of luck. Phase 1 belonged to Pat. He used his credentials as a mechanic to get his truck into the corporate parking garage, claiming a late-night service call for one of the executives' cars. Tucked away in the back of his truck, hidden under a tarp, was the real infiltration team. Phase 2 was the infiltration itself. The team consisted of Courtney, Stargirl, Yolanda, Wildcat, and Izuku, Deku, all in full costume. Beth, their eye in the sky, was parked a block away in her parents' minivan, a laptop open in front of her. Okay, team, Beth's voice crackled through their earpieces, a mix of professionalism and barely contained excitement. Chuck has hacked the building's security network. He's looping the camera feeds on the 3rd floor, but you'll only have a 12-minute window before the system flags the anomaly. You need to be in and out before then. Copy that, Dr. Midnight, Courtney whispered back, giving Beth her new code name. They moved through the darkened hallways like ghosts. Yolanda's stealth skills were a natural extension of her predatory grace. Courtney's staff provided low-level light and scanned for energy signatures. Izuku, however, was the linchpin. His analytical mind processed the building's layout, which Chuck was feeding him through Beth, identifying structural weaknesses and potential choke points. They reached the main server room. The door was protected by a keypad and a biometric scanner. Problem, Courtney said. We can't get through that. We don't have to, Izuku whispered. He pointed to the ceiling. The ventilation shaft. It's large enough. Yolanda, can you get the grate open without making too much noise? Yolanda nodded, her claws extending with a soft snick. She scaled the wall with effortless agility and began to work on the screws. It was at that moment that Rick Tyler chose to make his appearance. He hadn't been part of the plan. He had followed Pat's truck on his motorcycle, his suspicions raised. Now, he stormed down the hallway, his face a thunderous mask of rage. What the hell is this? He demanded, his voice echoing in the silent building. Some kind of costume party? Rick, get out of here! Courtney hissed. You'll get us all caught. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what you're doing in a place I've been trying to break into for a year. An alarm suddenly blared, a shrill, piercing sound. He tripped a floor sensor I hadn't bypassed yet. Beth's panicked voice yelled in their ears. Security is on its way. 2 guards coming from the west stairwell. Rick's impatient, brute force approach had ruined the entire mission. They were compromised. Plan B. Izuku yelled, making a split-second decision. Yolanda, Courtney, get the data. I'll create a diversion. He didn't wait for a response. He activated One for All, the green lightning flaring to life around him. Rick! With me. You wanted a target? You're about to get one. Izuku charged down the hallway toward the approaching guards, Rick, after a moment's hesitation, running after him, his fists clenched. The 2 security guards were no match for them. Izuku moved with a speed they couldn't track, disarming them with precise, non-lethal chops to their wrists. Rick, however, was a blunt instrument. He tackled one of the guards, his rage finally unleashed on a deserving target. Rick, stop! Izuku commanded, pulling him off the groaning guard. They're just security. They're not the real enemy. But it was too late. More guards were coming. The building was on lockdown. We have to get out of here. Izuku yelled into his comm. We've got it. Courtney's voice replied. The main project files. We're heading for the rendezvous. Izuku grabbed Rick by the arm. Come on. We're leaving. I'm not running. Rick snarled, trying to pull away. This isn't running, it's a tactical retreat. Izuku countered, his grip like iron. He looked Rick dead in the eye, his own green eyes blazing with an intensity that momentarily stunned the angry teenager. You want to fight the real monsters? You have to be smart about it. Raging like a wild animal will just get you killed. To get them out, Izuku knew he had to do something drastic. They were cornered in a large atrium, with guards closing in from all sides. He saw a massive, reinforced window overlooking a lower-level rooftop. It was their only way out. Cover your ears! He yelled. He took a deep breath, focusing all his power into his right arm, ignoring the protests from his still healing hand within the brace. He pushed the output higher than he had in the garage. 30%. The static in his veins roared. St. Louis smash. He kicked out, not with his foot, but with the full, unrestrained power of One for All channeled through his leg. The air itself seemed to warp and compress before exploding outward. The resulting shockwave was a physical thing, a battering ram of pure force. It didn't just break the window, it atomized it. The entire wall of glass disintegrated into a cloud of glittering dust. The guards were thrown back, stunned and disoriented. The sheer power of the attack was terrifying. But the cost was immediate. An agonizing, fiery pain shot up Izuku's entire right leg. He heard a sickening pop from his ankle as he landed, and he collapsed to the ground, crying out in pain. Rick stared, his anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by sheer, unadulterated awe. He had seen power before, but this was something else entirely. It was the power of a god, and the boy wielding it had just crippled himself to save them. Through the shattered window, the roar of an engine grew louder. Pat, in the full SDRIP armor, hovered outside. Need a lift, boys? Rick, without a word, helped a grimacing Izuku to his feet, practically carrying him to the opening. They climbed into the robot's massive metal hand and were lifted away into the night, leaving a trail of chaos and confusion behind them. The mission, by any tactical definition, had been a spectacular failure. They had been discovered, and Izuku was badly injured. Pat would have to create a reinforced brace for his leg now, a painful reminder of his early, reckless days at UA. But as they flew through the night, Rick Tyler finally looked at the hourglass locket that Pat had given him. He opened it. Inside, his father's smiling face looked back at him. For the first time, he didn't just see a story. He saw the truth. He had found his target, and the fledgling Justice Society of America, fractured and bruised as it was, had found its hourman.